You've been throwing money into a hole every single spring, and the garden center is counting on you to keep doing it. The average homeowner drops somewhere between $300 and $600 every April on trays of flowers that are biologically programmed to quit on you before the first hard frost, every one of them. Finished by October. And then you are right back in that parking lot the next spring, cart full, wallet open, repeating the exact same purchase you made the year before. We are ending that pattern today. There are 9 perennial flowers you put in the ground one single time, and they return every year on their own, bigger, healthier, and more striking than the season before. A few of them will still be blooming in that same spot long after you have forgotten what you paid for them. Keep watching, because plant number 6 is going to completely rewire the way you look at your own backyard. Perennial number 1, Peony. The peony produces some of the largest, most extravagant flowers you can grow without a greenhouse. Dense, layered blooms in soft blush, pure white, deep crimson coral, and pale butter yellow, many of them carrying a fragrance that stops people mid-sentence when they lean in. The flowers can reach the size of a grown adult's open hand, and a single mature plant can carry dozens of them at peak. It grows roughly 2 to 3 feet tall and just as wide, forming a tidy, rounded shrub of glossy, dark green foliage that stays attractive long after the flowers are gone, which means this plant is earning its space in your border for the entire season, not just the 2 weeks it is in full show. It blooms in late spring, roughly May into June depending on your region, arriving right as the spring bulbs are fading and bridging you straight into the main summer season. It wants full sun, a minimum of 6 hours of direct light daily, and reasonably fertile, well-draining soil with a pH around 6.5 to 7.0, slightly acidic to neutral, which is exactly where most North American garden soil already sits. Once established, it shrugs off cold without any complaint at all. The USDA hardiness zones for peony are 3 through 8, which covers the upper Midwest, the Northeast, the mountain states, and most of the country that actually gets a real winter. And here's the part that should make you take this plant seriously. A peony does not just survive, it outlives the gardener. Plants that were set in the ground by someone's grandmother are still flowering on that same property 80 and 90 years later, never moved, never replaced, never divided. You are not buying a flower. You are buying an heirloom that will likely outlast the house you are standing in. The single mistake that ruins more peonies than anything else is planting them too deep. The growth points, the little reddish buds called eyes, must sit no more than 1 to 2 inches below the soil surface. Bury those eyes any deeper, in a misguided attempt to be thorough, and the plant will produce healthy leaves year after year and refuse to flower for the rest of its life. Plant shallow. And ignore the ants you see crawling on the unopened buds in spring. They are feeding on a harmless sugar the buds release, they are doing the plant no damage whatsoever, and they vanish the moment the flowers open. Leave them be. Perennial number 2, bearded iris. Before we go any further, understand that this is the iris responsible for that unmistakable ruffled, almost orchid-like flower that shows up in old farmhouse gardens and somehow keeps multiplying for decades with nobody tending it. Bearded iris produces upright sword-shaped foliage topped with elaborate blooms in a color range that genuinely covers the entire spectrum, including shades you will struggle to find anywhere else in the perennial world: smoky bronze, near black purple, clear apricot, and intricate two-tone combinations on a single flower. The blooms sit on strong stalks 2 to 4 feet tall, and the fan of bluish-green foliage stays structural and architectural in the bed all season, giving you vertical texture even when the plant is out of flower. It blooms in late spring May into June, overlapping beautifully with your peonies and extending that late spring color wave. Bearded iris wants full sun, 6 hours minimum, and sharply draining soil with a pH of roughly 6.8 to 7.0. It is genuinely drought tolerant once settled in, storing water in its thick rhizomes the way a succulent does. The USDA hardiness zones are 3 through 9, an enormous range that includes nearly every gardener watching this. The reason bearded iris spreads so generously is the rhizome, the fat horizontal root that creeps along just at the soil surface and produces new fans as it travels. A single rhizome you plant this year becomes a clump of several within 2 seasons, and that clump can be lifted and split into a dozen new plants you never paid for. The care detail almost everyone gets wrong is burying the rhizome. Unlike every other plant on this list, the bearded iris rhizome needs to sit right at the soil surface with its top exposed to the sun, half in and half out of the ground. Plant it deep like a normal root, and it rots. For gardeners in zones 8 and 9 across the south, divide and replant in late summer or early fall rather than spring, giving the rhizome time to root before the heat returns, and choose a spot with strong air movement because still, humid southern air invites the soft rot that is this plant's only real enemy. Perennial number 3, Shasta daisy. The Shasta daisy gives you the single most recognizable, most universally cheerful flower in all of gardening. Crisp white petals radiating out from a bright golden center, the flower a child draws when you ask them to draw a flower. There is nothing complicated about its appeal, and that is exactly its strength. It reads clearly from across the yard, it pairs with absolutely everything, and it pumps out blooms by the hundreds on a single established plant. It grows 1 to 3 feet tall depending on variety, forming clean, upright clumps that hold themselves without staking. And it blooms for a remarkably long stretch, from June straight through September if you keep up with it, 3 to 4 months of dependable white through the entire heat of summer. It wants full sun, 6 hours or more, and average well-draining soil. It is not fussy about fertility, and it accepts a wide pH band of roughly 6.0 to 8.0, which means it grows happily in the alkaline soils common across the Midwest and West that defeat pickier flowers. The USDA hardiness zones are 4 through 9. The thing that separates a Shasta daisy that blooms for 1 month from one that blooms for 4 is deadheading. Snap off the spent flowers as they fade before they go to seed, and the plant interprets that as a signal to keep producing fresh buds in pursuit of setting seed it never gets to set. Stay on top of that simple task through July and August, and you stretch the display deep into early fall. Divide the clumps every 2 to 3 years in early spring, because Shasta daisies are vigorous to the point of crowding themselves out, and a clump left alone too long develops a dead, woody center while the edges keep growing. Lift it, split it, replant the strong outer sections, and you have refreshed the planting and multiplied your stock in 1 afternoon. Perennial number 4, Yarrow. This plant is growing wild right now in ditches on highway medians and across untended fields where no human being has ever watered it, fertilized it, or paid it the slightest attention, and it returns and blooms there every year regardless. That is the most honest measure of how tough Yarrow is. Hand it even a marginal spot in your yard, and it will perform at a level that feels almost unreasonable for the effort involved. Yarrow produces wide, flat-topped clusters of tiny flowers, hundreds packed into each plate-like head, in warm gold, soft butter yellow, brick red, salmon, rose pink, and creamy white, sitting above soft, ferny, finely cut foliage that is aromatic when you brush it and attractive in its own right. It grows 2 to 3 feet tall, and the flat flower heads create a horizontal layer in the border that contrasts beautifully against spiky and rounded plants nearby. It blooms from June through September, the full length of summer. Yarrow demands full sun and well-draining soil, and here is the counterintuitive part: it actively prefers poor, lean ground. The pH range is wide, roughly 5.5 to 7.0, and it is one of the most drought-tolerant flowering perennials you can plant, thriving through dry spells that flatten everything around it. The USDA hardiness zones are 3 through 9. Yarrow is reliably deer-resistant thanks to that aromatic foliage deer refuse to touch, and the flat flower heads are a landing pad for an enormous range of pollinators, bees, butterflies, and the tiny beneficial insects that prey on garden pests. The mistake people make with Yarrow is kindness. They plant it in rich, composted, regularly watered beds, and the plant responds to all that pampering by growing tall, soft, and floppy, splaying open in the middle and collapsing under its own weight. Starve it. Give it your worst, driest, most neglected ground, skip the fertilizer entirely, and it stands up straight and blooms harder than anything you have ever babied. Perennial number 5, hardy geranium. Forget the red-potted geraniums on every porch in America because those are pelargoniums, annuals, a completely different plant that dies the moment frost touches it. The hardy geranium, also called cranesbill, is the true perennial, and it is one of the most quietly hard-working plants you can put in a garden. It forms a low-spreading mound of deeply cut, almost lacy foliage covered for months in saucer-shaped flowers of violet blue, magenta, soft pink, and pure white, often veined with darker lines that give each bloom real depth up close. It grows 8 to 18 inches tall and spreads outward to 2 feet or more, weaving gently between taller plants and smothering the bare soil where weeds would otherwise take hold. The best varieties bloom from late spring all the way into October, one of the longest bloom windows of any perennial in existence. It is genuinely flexible on light, performing in full sun through to light shade, and it accepts average well-draining soil with a pH around 6.0 to 7.5. It is drought-tolerant once established. The USDA hardiness zones run 4 through 8 for most varieties. The technique that doubles your bloom is the midsummer shear. When the first big flush starts to look tired and the foliage gets a little ragged around July, take shears and cut the entire plant back hard, down to a few inches from the ground. It will look brutal for about a week, then fresh foliage erupts from the base, and within 3 weeks, you have a clean new mound covered in a second full wave of flowers that carries you into fall. Most people are too timid to do this and settle for one fading flush. Cut it back without hesitation, and you get the whole season. If you are getting real value out of this, I want you to be honest with yourself for a second. Where else are you finding gardening guidance this specific, this matched to your actual hardiness zone, this immediately usable for absolutely nothing? This shows up here every week. Tap subscribe right now. There is genuinely no downside and a whole season's worth of knowledge waiting on the other side of one button. Perennial number 6, bee balm. Here is the plant I told you about at the start, the one that changes how you understand what a garden is actually for. Most people plant flowers for themselves to look at. Bee balm makes you realize your garden can be a living thing that moves, hums, and pulls wildlife in from blocks away. Bee balm, also called monarda, produces wild, shaggy, almost firework-shaped blooms in vivid scarlet, hot pink, royal purple, and deep lavender, sitting atop square stems clothed in fragrant, minty foliage you can smell from a few feet away. It grows 2 to 4 feet tall and forms generous expanding patches. It blooms from July into August, right at the peak of summer. It wants full sun to light shade and consistently moist, fertile, well-draining soil with a pH around 6.0 to 7.0. The USDA hardiness zones are 3 through 9. Now here is why this plant earns the number 6 slot. Bee balm is one of the single most powerful hummingbird magnets available to North American gardeners. The tubular individual florets and the hot red and pink coloring are precisely what hummingbirds are built to feed from, and an established stand in full bloom will bring them in repeatedly day after day, often within arm's reach of where you are sitting. If you have hung feeders for years and never reliably drawn hummingbirds, this is the answer, because a living flower beats sugar water every time. On top of that, bee balm is native to North America, which means it supports native bees and butterflies that imported ornamentals simply cannot. The one weakness you must manage is powdery mildew, the dusty white film that coats the leaves in crowded, stagnant conditions. The fix is air movement. In spring, when the new shoots come up thick, thin them out and remove a third of the stems entirely, cutting them to the ground so the remaining ones have space to breathe. Water at the soil level, never over the top of the foliage, and that mildew problem largely disappears. Right here, I want to actually hear from you. Of the 6 we have covered so far, peony, bearded iris, Shasta daisy, yarrow, hardy geranium, and bee balm, which one are you most fired up to plant this season? And tell me your USDA zone when you comment. Drop both down below right now. I read every comment that comes in. I want to know where this community is gardening from and what pulls you in, and your answer genuinely helps me decide what to cover in the videos coming up. So that comment does more than you think. Perennial number 7, Hosta. There is a spot in nearly every yard that has beaten you. The deep shade under a mature tree, the narrow strip along the north wall of the house that never sees the sun, the dim corner where every flower you have tried has sulked, stretched, and died. Hosta was built for exactly that ground. While most plants on this list want sun, the Hosta is the answer to shade, and it turns your most frustrating dead zone into the lushest part of the yard. The Hosta is grown above all for its foliage, broad sculptural leaves that come in blue-green, chartreuse, deep forest green, and an endless range of variegated patterns edged or centered in cream, white, and gold. A single mature clump can spread 3 feet across and reads as a bold, intentional architectural statement in a shady bed where nothing else will grow. It also throws up tall stalks of pale lavender or white flowers in mid to late summer. Some varieties intensely fragrant in the evening. It grows anywhere from 6 inches to 3 feet tall depending on variety, with that same range in spread. It wants partial to full shade, consistently moist humus-rich soil, and a pH around 6.0 to 7.5. The USDA hardiness zones are 3 through 9. Hostas are among the easiest perennials in existence to divide. Slice a clump in half with a sharp spade in early spring as the pointed shoots emerge, replant both halves, and each becomes a full clump within a season, which is how a single starter plant becomes an entire shaded border over a few years at zero additional cost. 2 honest cautions. First, slugs love hosta leaves and chew holes in them, so in damp climates choose the thicker, more textured blue-leaved varieties, which slugs largely leave alone. Second, deer consider hostas a delicacy, so if you garden under real deer pressure, pair them with the truly deer-proof plants on this list, and plan accordingly rather than learning the hard way in a single overnight. Perennial number 8, Sedum. Sedum, the upright autumn-blooming kind often sold as stone crop, is the plant that solves the problem you do not realize you have until September arrives. The late-season gap where the summer flowers are spent, and the garden looks tired weeks before frost. Sedum is just hitting its stride at that exact moment. It produces dense broccoli-like flower heads that emerge pale green in summer, slowly deepen to soft pink, and finish a rich rusty bronze red as fall sets in, the color shifting over weeks so the plant looks different every time you walk past it. The foliage is thick, fleshy, and succulent, blue-green and handsome from the moment it emerges in spring. It grows 1 to 2 feet tall in clean, upright clumps that never need staking when grown correctly. It blooms from late August through October, the precise window when your garden most needs something alive in it. It demands full sun and well-draining soil. It is extraordinarily drought-tolerant, storing water in those succulent leaves, and it handles a wide pH range. The USDA hardiness zones are 3 through 9 as fall fades. The flower heads dry to a deep brown and stand stiff and upright through the entire winter, catching snow and frost and giving you genuine structure in the bleakest months, while late-season bees and butterflies work the blooms when almost no other nectar source remains. The mistake, exactly as with yarrow, is overfeeding. Rich soil and heavy watering make sedum grow tall and soft, and the clump splits open in the middle and flops outward into an ugly ring. Plant it lean and dry, withhold the fertilizer, and it stands up straight and solid. And do not cut those dried heads down in fall. Leave them standing all winter for the structure and the wildlife, then cut back in early spring just as the new rosettes appear at the base. Perennial number 9, Hellebore. This is the most overlooked plant in North American gardens. The garden designers know it. The botanical garden curators plant it by the hundred. The serious horticulturists treat it as essential. And the average homeowner has never heard the name and has no idea what they have been missing every single winter. Hellebore, also called the Lenten rose, does something almost no other perennial will do. It blooms in the dead of late winter and earliest spring, often pushing its flowers up through the last of the snow when the rest of the garden is still bare brown ground. The nodding cup-shaped blooms come in dusky plum, deep wine red, soft green, speckled cream, pure white, and near black, many with intricate freckling inside the petals that rewards a close look. The foliage is thick, leathery, deeply divided, and evergreen, holding its structure right through winter in most regions. It grows 1 to 2 feet tall and spreads slowly into substantial clumps. It blooms from February into April, depending on your zone, weeks ahead of anything else. It wants partial to full shade, the same difficult ground the hosta loves, with moist, humus-rich, well-draining soil and a pH around 7.0, neutral to slightly alkaline. The USDA hardiness zones are 4 through 9. Hellebore is deeply deer and rodent resistant because every part of the plant is toxic and animals know to leave it completely alone, which makes it invaluable in yards where deer eat everything else to the ground. It is also exceptionally long-lived and resents disturbance, so choose its spot carefully and then leave it there permanently. One care note that transforms the display. In late winter, just before the new flower stems push up, Cut away the old leathery leaves from the previous year, which by then look tattered and worn. Removing them lets the fresh flowers stand clean and visible instead of hiding behind ragged foliage, and the plant pushes out a crisp new set of leaves right behind the blooms. That single 10-minute task is the difference between a hellebore that looks scruffy and one that looks like it belongs in a botanical garden. You can choose every plant on this list perfectly. You can match all 9 to your exact zone, your exact light, your exact spacing, and you can still end up disappointed if you skip or rush the one step nobody wants to talk about. Soil preparation is not glamorous. Nobody is racking up millions of views filming themselves turning over a garden bed, but it is the single factor that decides whether your garden quietly thrives for decades or struggles and frustrates you from the first season. And it is the step beginners skip and veterans wish they had respected far earlier. Loosen your soil to a full 12 inches deep before you plant anything, not the 6 inches your tiller reaches without effort, the full 12. Perennial roots drive deep, and they need loose, open ground to do it. Roots that slam into compacted soil partway down stop descending and begin circling, and circling roots make weak, unstable, drought-prone plants. Deep, loose soil makes the wide, anchored root systems that turn these plants into the long-lived powerhouses they are capable of becoming. Work 3 to 4 inches of quality compost into the top 8 inches of that loosened ground. This one amendment does more than any bag of fertilizer or bottle of anything you could buy. In heavy clay, common across the Midwest, Southeast, and Northeast, compost opens up the dense structure and improves drainage. In loose sandy soil, common in the Southwest and along the coasts, compost holds moisture and gives roots something to grab. In good loam, it feeds the soil life that feeds your plant steadily all season. The exceptions are the lean soil lovers, Yarrow and Sedum, which you should plant in unimproved ground and never enrich. If you are planting in fall, the ideal window for perennials in zones 5 through 8, because roots establish before winter and growth explodes the following spring, that compost has the entire winter to integrate. If you are planting in spring, amend right before you plant, not weeks ahead. Dig each hole twice as wide as the root ball and slightly shallower than its depth, so the crown of the plant sits right at, or just barely above, the surrounding soil. A crown buried even an inch too low sits in conditions that breed rot and decline, so when you are unsure, set the plant a touch high and let it settle. Before it goes in, gently tease apart the outer roots with your fingers, especially if they have started circling the bottom of the nursery pot, because roots that learn to grow in a circle keep circling unless you physically redirect them outward. 60 seconds of loosening those roots directly decides how fast and how strongly the plant takes hold. Water deeply and slowly the moment it is planted, a thorough soaking that reaches the full depth of the root ball, not a quick spray across the top. For the first 4 to 6 weeks, water once a week if the rain does not. That is the establishment window, when the root system is actively pushing out into the surrounding soil, and steady moisture is what lets that happen on schedule. After those weeks, switch to deep and infrequent watering, a slow soaking every 10 to 14 days during dry spells that wets the soil 8 to 10 inches down. Deep watering trains roots to chase moisture downward where it is reliable, instead of clustering near the surface where heat and drought punish them. Finally, mulch 2 to 3 inches deep around every plant, which suppresses weeds, steadies the soil temperature in both summer and winter, and slows evaporation, but follow one unbreakable rule: never pile mulch against the stem or crown. Keep a clear 2-inch ring of bare soil around the base of every plant, because mulch packed against the crown traps moisture there and causes the crown rot and fungal disease that kill more perennials than cold ever will. For gardeners in zones 9 through 11 across Florida, southern Texas, southern California, and Hawaii, water newly planted perennials twice weekly through that first establishment window, because the heat pulls moisture out faster than a single weekly watering can replace. One of the biggest reasons people give up on perennials has nothing to do with the plants. It is simply not knowing what to do and when, and either doing the wrong thing at the wrong moment or doing nothing when something specific was called for. So here is your full year-round calendar for everything on this list. In spring, which lands anywhere from late February in the warmest zones to April in the coldest, cut back any dried stems and seed heads you left standing through winter down to a few inches from the base, where the new growth is usually already visible. Divide overcrowded clumps of Shasta daisy, Hosta, bearded iris, and hardy geranium if they crowded out their own centers or flowered less the previous year, doing it early before much top growth develops so the divisions have the whole season to root in. Cut last year's tattered foliage off your hellebores just before the new flowers rise. Lay down a 1-inch layer of compost around your hungrier plants as a gentle, slow-release feed, and skip the high-nitrogen synthetic fertilizer entirely, because heavy nitrogen drives leafy growth at the direct expense of flowers, the exact opposite of what you want. Do not divide or disturb your peonies or hellebores, which both resent being moved and perform best left alone for decades. Through summer, deadhead your Shasta daisies and bee balm consistently to keep new buds coming, and shear back the hardy geranium hard after its first flush to trigger a clean second wave. Thin the bee balm stems for air movement and water everything at ground level, never overhead because wet foliage is exactly what powdery mildew needs to take hold. Water deeply during dry stretches aimed at the roots. In fall, cut back the bee balm, Shasta daisy, and bearded iris foliage after the first hard frost, but leave the sedum heads and any other ornamental structure standing for winter interest and wildlife. In zones 4 and 5, lay 2 to 3 inches of mulch over the crowns before the ground freezes solid, because that insulation prevents the freeze-thaw cycles that heave roots clean out of the soil and do more winter damage than cold alone. Do not fertilize anything in fall, since it pushes tender new growth that has no time to harden before frost kills it. Through winter, leave the standing stems and seed heads as long as the birds are using them, and spend the quiet weeks planning. Order from mail-order nurseries in January and February because their selection dwarfs what your local garden center carries, and the best varieties sell out long before most people start thinking about spring. Here is the planning trap that catches even experienced gardeners. They pick plants based on whatever happens to be flowering at the nursery the day they walk in, which means everything in the cart peaks at the same moment, and they end up with a garden that explodes for 3 glorious weeks and then offers almost nothing for the remaining 5 months. Bloom succession solves it completely, and these 9 plants give you everything you need to run continuous color from late winter straight through to hard frost. Hellebore opens the year, blooming through the snow in February and March when the rest of the garden is still asleep, delivering color at the moment you are most starved for it. Peony and bearded iris arrive next in May and June, carrying the big, extravagant late spring show and bridging you into summer. Yarrow, Shasta daisy, hardy geranium, and bee balm define the midsummer peak through July and August, the high season when the garden is loudest with pollinators and the color is at its most relentless. Sedum then carries you from late summer into deep fall, August through October, hitting its stride precisely when the summer flowers fade, while the Hosta holds the shaded ground lush and full underneath all of it the entire season long. Plant in odd numbers, groups of 3 or 5 rather than lonely singles or pairs, because grouped plantings read as natural drifts from a distance and give the garden a designed, intentional quality. Put the short plants up front, hardy geranium and shorter Shasta daisies, the medium ones through the middle, Yarrow, Sedum, Hosta, and bearded iris, and the tall ones at the back, Peony, bee balm, and taller daisies. Repeat the same plant in several spots across the bed instead of clustering it all in one corner, because that repetition creates rhythm and makes the whole thing look planned rather than thrown together. For gardeners in zones 8 through 10, slide this entire calendar 4 to 6 weeks earlier, with hellebores opening in winter and sedum potentially blooming into November, and use the framework as your structure while you adjust the exact timing to your own climate. Here is my honest recommendation after everything we have covered. If you have never grown a perennial in your life and you want the fastest reward with the least chance of failure, start with Shasta daisy and yarrow. Both tolerate poor soil, both shrug off drought once settled, both multiply on their own, and both pour out months of color while asking almost nothing of you, so your very first season will look and feel like a thriving garden instead of a beginner's experiment. If you have been at this for years and you want to add the kind of plants that change the permanent character and structure of a garden, put in peony and hellebore this season. Give the peony a sunny spot and plant those eyes shallow. Give the hellebore your difficult shade and then never move it, and both will reward your patience with a presence and longevity no annual could ever come close to, blooming on that same ground long after everything else has been replaced. And if you want a garden that gives something real to the pollinators, the hummingbirds, the birds, and your own eyes in every single month from late winter through fall, with no daily fuss and no annual replanting, build the whole plan around all 9 of these using the succession framework we just walked through. That combination hands you color in every season, wildlife in every season, free, and a garden that grows fuller, stronger, and more beautiful every year you leave it standing. Put them in once, carry them through that first establishment season, and then step back and watch what your yard turns into. If you watch this all the way through and got real value out of every part, the plant breakdowns, the zone data, the soil prep, the calendar, the succession plan, then do one thing for me. Send this to one person in your life who gardens, the neighbor, or the family member, or the friend you know is going to spend money again this spring on flowers that will not survive the year. Send it to them right now, because what is in this video will change the way they garden for good. And that is worth passing along. And if after all of this you are somehow still not subscribed, I want to understand why, because this is free. It is here every week, and it is built specifically for people who want real information and real zone-accurate guidance that makes every hour in their garden count for more. Tap subscribe right now, hit the bell so the next one reaches you automatically, and leave a comment telling me which of these 9 you are planting first and which zone you are gardening in. Now go put something in the ground that is going to outlast the season.